Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight and your interest in our program. The title of this is Gender Dignity, Unique and Equal. And I'm your host tonight, Matthew Francis. I want to just announce right off that this is the year 2015, and we've had a tremendous amount of awareness on transgender issues. But that awareness is not translated into acceptance. In fact, there has been a 31% increase in transgender violence. And so when I thought about doing this program, I thought, wouldn't it be nice just to introduce ordinary people who are doing wonderful things? These are folks tonight that are brave enough to come forward. They live in your community. They work in your community. They're your friends, your neighbors, and your coworkers. And you're going to hear a little bit about their truths tonight that they're willing to share with you. And I hope that you'll open your hearts and your minds to them and grapple with some of these issues, because it is my personal feeling that you do not have to agree or even understand to have a safe space for someone. But we hope that you will be open and learn a lot, and I know that I will. So without further ado, we're going to get started. The first thing I want to do is to go around the room and have folks introduce themselves. Please include your name, your pronouns, and just a bit about yourself. And that can be anything. That could be your hobbies, what you do for work, anything you feel is relevant. And Becca, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, I'm Becca. Matthew, thanks for having us here to chat tonight. I use she or feminine or gender neutral pronouns. I identify as gender fluid or as queer. And so that can be sometimes disjointing in that my gender presentation fluctuates on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. It's always really interesting. I'm a mental health worker. I am an energy worker. And I really enjoy working for social justice and in all of the intersecting ways that happens in our community. I'm also, I really love dogs. I'm just a person. And I'm really glad to be here to have these conversations tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Becca. Leith.
Hi, my name's Leith, and I go by male pronouns, so him and his. And I am from what we call Down East Maine, in a small town, and I've migrated south down to Biddeford, and working down there. I came out 10 years ago, and I'm very happily living my life.
Thank you, Leith. Sage.
Thank you, Matthew, for putting this together. It's really a thrill to be together with community and diverse community sharing our stories. My name is Sage, and I go by she, he, they. Very flexible to whatever people's interpretation is of me, as long as they're being kind. I live here in Portland, and I have since 1999, minus 4 years on the West Coast. And shortly, actually, as I moved to Portland in 99, I was coming out as trans myself and exploring what that meant, and have found Portland to be a really rich community to be exploring that, and probably more to say about that. I own a little wellness center just over the bridge here in South Portland called Alchemy, and I am a body worker, specifically working with exploring how to heal injustice in the body. So how to create and find what would justice feel like in our bodies. So I love my work. I think there's a lot to heal on the planet right now. And I think being trans has a very kind of an exciting lens on being able to support people in their healing process, because it's just such a lens that's out of the box. And I think when we're talking about how to heal, we need to get out of the box often. So.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sage.
Sure.
So to elaborate a little bit more on this question, I guess I'd like to ask, maybe when you came to realize these issues within yourself. I know for me, I was very young. I knew this right away. But I would like to hear more from Becca to tell me your realization story, and that can be anything you'd like to include.
Sure. Well, I know My whole life, my parents, especially my mom, was very dedicated to allowing us to have a gender diverse experience as a young person. I remember growing up and hearing stories about my mom dressing me up in like a blue jumpsuit and yelling at our neighbors because that wasn't acceptable. To be fair, I grew up in a place in this country where gender norms were a little bit more stringent sometimes, just from my family background, and that's part of my story. I really realized that I was deviating even from a like liberal feminist norm when I was maybe 12 or 13. I started to realize that I was moving outside of the boundaries of what was acceptable for a strong woman, and that my gender was sometimes making people uncomfortable. I was getting asked questions by my parents about whether or not I thought that I was transgender. It was an interesting question for me that I never really knew how to answer. But there were definitely moments growing up when, like I said, around puberty, that I realized the way that I was presenting in the world it didn't make sense to my parents, who are well-meaning and knew a little bit. It didn't really make sense to me. It made other people uncomfortable sometimes. And that's kind of where I've continued to sit. I made the decision pretty early on that I needed to be comfortable in my body. I needed to be comfortable in my gender expression, and I didn't owe it to anyone else to make them feel comfortable. And so that's kind of where I've stayed. My gender presentation has fluctuated wildly in my life. Right now, I'm presenting in a much more feminine way, and that is different in and of itself. I like it. I think it's really fun. I get to do a lot more with clothes and makeup than I did 5 years ago, and that's just kind of where I'm at. That could change tomorrow, and I would be okay with that. I realize that can be an affront for other folks who maybe get used to seeing me a certain way, but that's okay. I feel like I don't owe it to anyone to explain my gender journey, but I do owe it to myself to be comfortable in my own skin, and that's hard enough.
Oh, I agree. I mean, discomfort is a part of growth. Yes. Leith.
Yes. So to talk a little bit about coming out, I guess, which I've done many a time. So I think I knew when I was very young who I wanted to be, and I really wanted to be a boy. I wanted to be playing with the boys, but I grew up surrounded by a lot of women, and I grew up to embrace the feminine side and to love my curves, and that was the body that I was given, and I was told that that's what you get, and that's what you're meant to love. And I went through a pretty deep depression in my 20s. I did not like my body. I was very unhappy with the choices that I was being told, none of which were meant, in any of the choices was a definition of what I thought I was. And I was given a book by Leslie Feinberg, Stone Butch Blues, which really, cracked the door open for me when I thought, wow, I'm not the only one thinking these things, at least. And so I kind of slept with that under my pillow for a few years. And then I got lucky. I got to take a trip out to Chicago to visit a good friend of mine. And she introduced me to the first trans man and woman living full-time and passing. And I said to them, "You can do this?" I didn't know. I just thought I was doomed to, live a miserable life. And they said, yes, we have the resources here. There's a clinic here. There's doctors here. There's, and so within a few months, I moved to Chicago. And I needed to move away. I was feeling very uncomfortable around my family and not feeling like I could be who I was, because I felt like I had to answer to them and what they wanted me to be. And so I think the distance really helped me become who I wanted to be. And within 2 years of being in Chicago, I transitioned, and I've been living full-time as a man since.
Terrific. Now, I do know a little bit about you, Leaf,
Yeah.
and I know that you're a twin.
Oh, yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
What kind of a twin are you?
Well, I think the first thing that people ask when I'm a twin is what kind of twin I am, and I say yes, I have a twin sister, because it often alleviates the "are you fraternal or identical" question, and a lot of people go, "Oh, so you're fraternal," and often I leave that as that's the end of the conversation. But I think, unfortunately, I lose that certain amount of who I really am, and that pride that I have of being an identical twin, and how close we've been since we were really young. And I think it's hard being transgendered when you're talking to someone that doesn't know that side of you, to bring up your past life, and all of a sudden that kind of outs you into the conversation.
Sure.
And so it's tough. I mean, I really am proud to be identical. There aren't a lot of sort of what I call old school identical people out there, and so she's very supportive of who I am as well.
She's supportive.
Yes.
May I ask, and if this is uncomfortable, but does she identify in any way her gender differently?
I think I am going to say that she identifies as a cisgendered female.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that's fascinating,
Yeah.
because right now there's a book
Yeah.
with twins in Maine,
Right.
Wayne Maines and Nicole Maines, I believe,
Yeah.
and they were identical twins, and one is trans, and then the other is not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you, Sage.
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's such a gender has been such a journey. I think that I'm the same person, I was when I was born. My gender, and yet, of course, it's taken on these many expressions and iterations. I think, it's just such a funny thing to identify my gender. Like, it's right in this moment in time in my life, I notice, I don't have a resistance to it, because I definitely identify as trans, but there's that part of me, like Prince, I think, who has the symbol for his name that sort of is like, gender's just so fluid to me that it's almost kind of silly to try to even attempt to put a word to it. Mm-hmm. And I mean gender, did I just say gender's so silly? I mean, it's like it's so fluid, it's so, it's as many people as many combinations. Mm-hmm. And I so honor that we have, been, all the conditioning that we've been through around male and female, and I've just been really lucky, actually, to be a part of a generation. I'm 42 years old, where I've been able to be a part of this wave of people who have been so brave and so courageous to really unpack this conditioning around what is male, what is female, what is body, what is gender, what is sex. And so much of my coming out story, I feel like, was being a part of a community that was breaking new ground around that. Mm-hmm. My big influences were Kate Bornstein, were Leslie Feinberg, and I found that my gender identity was so much more confusing and upsetting to me than coming out as gay. Say, when I was 14, I came out to myself as gay, not to anybody else. I was in the closet for a bunch of years, but once I learned that, like, gay, homosexual was just someone who loved somebody of the same sex, I was like, once I could unlink the negative associations around it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Sure.
And then I was like, okay, I'm gay, like, next, it was sort of like that. And it wasn't, because of course it was complicated, and I was in the closet, it was in the late 80s and early 90s, but it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I had enough capacity and support to even start to bring up some of the questions around gender, because I had grown up in the Jerry Springer era, not that that's not still happening, where trans people were just completely objectified and paraded on television shows as, you know, the most deviant, perverted people, you know, just as bad as all these other sort of social outcasts. And so I had so compartmentalized the idea of trans anything as something that was so completely not me, because of all of the, like, the intensive collective hatred toward trans people. And so for me, it was, you know, once it really started to come up for me around an exploration around, okay, I was born female. I often feel like I have a masculine identity around my body, or around my expression, and certainly around my clothes since I was a kid, you know, and lots of other ways that came up for me. I was so scared because I had all this conditioning that just even the idea that I would even ask the question just meant that I might be that wrong, and I might be that bad, and I might be that much of a deviant. And the shame then that I felt, like it was almost like I couldn't even think about it without just a mountain of shame. And then sort of the, you know, all of the shame around me, because trans still, I mean, this is in the early, you know, the 80s and the early 90s, it was just still so not cool.
Yes.
and it's still so not cool in a lot of areas now, but it was definitely still not cool then. So just to say that my journey was one of deep exploration. It was actually the first time I started to think about spirituality in my life, because it was a deep inner. It was so painful for me to think that I might be so wrong. I had to really turn to something bigger than myself, because I didn't think I could get through it otherwise, because I was so afraid.
Sure.
And that led me to Leslie Feinberg's book, Transgendered Warriors. And that, for folks out there, it's a beautiful resource of a book that goes back and looks at cultures across the world, and really shows that trans people have been a part of every culture at every time in history, and have also often been revered as leaders and spiritual seers and things like that. And I think once I sort of could get out of our American mainstream demonization of trans people and see that there are places where trans people were normalized and even celebrated.
Revered.
I was revered,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
I was like, oh, okay, like
Yeah.
I can do that too then. Like I
Yeah.
just needed a little bit of positive
Push.
okayness, like that it wasn't all Jerry Springer, you're gonna get shot. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really how, it was black and white to me.
Yes.
And so once I kind of got some of that, I was able to let myself start exploring.
Yes.
And then, you know, that was early 20s, and then it's just been an evolution since then, and there's lots of stories in that. But what I really came to is that I'm both.
Yes.
You know, it didn't feel right for me that I had to go to another shore, like of male. It was like, oh yeah, male, female, both and neither. And I just really filled out this idea of gender as a circle for me. And it changes over time, and given the people I meet, and, you know, how I interact and things like that. So and then it's just an open-ended exploration all the time, and that's how I live now, and that feels pretty beautiful to me.
Thank you so much.
You're
That was a
welcome.
very insightful, thoughtful answer.
Thanks, Matthew.
I was going to add one thing,
Yeah,
which
please
is
do,
that
please.
I met Sage at, I'm not sure what time in your life I met you, but you were definitely a role model to me at the time. I don't think you knew that, but I didn't have the answers, and I thought I could only be one way, and I saw you trying out different ways, and it really it helped me out.
It's so great.
I really appreciate, though, how you pointed out how we were demonized and oppressed, and I think that we are still considered freaks and just degenerates, so to speak. I've even had a pastor who, well-meaning, I said, you know, we accept everyone here, adulterers, and he just named all this plethora, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm in the same category as like a criminal. So that just, when you said that, that brought to mind, because I had internalized freak and abomination, and I thought, who wants to be that? So that kind of gives me a great segue into my next question, which is, how has being a gender diverse person enhanced your life, has made you grateful? And Becca, would you mind kicking us off with that?
Sure, of course. I think that's a great question. I feel, for me, understanding that I experience gender differently than other folks, and I do think there's a lot to be said about gender as performance and gender as socialization, and holding space for the polarity and the neutrality that is a gendered experience. For me, because I've always experienced gender, or I felt like I have always expressed my gender kind of all over that spectrum, I feel like that's given me the ability to be unapologetic in the rest of my life, because I've refused to let someone else tell me how to express myself, or how to identify myself, or to how to tell me to just to be human and to live my experience. That's given me the push to really take ownership over the rest of my life in a way that I feel I see my peers not always have the ability to do. Because I have experienced gender nonconformity for myself, and that's not a choice, it enables me to say no to other pressures that I experience, or to say yes to other opportunities that maybe other people are afraid to say yes to. In a way, I think it's made me more of a risk taker, because I'm forced outside of the social norms that most people experience just by virtue of being. And so that makes me, I'm less willing to apologize for the things that I want to do and the things that I feel like I need to experience. And I'm really grateful for that, because I'm not a timid person most of the time. I have my soft spots, like we all do. But I'm really grateful that I'm a person that is able to stand up for myself, and that I'm able to advocate for my own experiences. I'm also I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for the people that I knew as a young person that were supportive of queer and trans and all of the diversity of sexual and gender experiences, because I come from a generation where we got Kate Bornstein, we got all of these really great thinkers, and I got to read Judith Butler as a young person and go to my parents and say, I'm not crazy. There's somebody else out there that is thinking like I am, and is asking the questions that I want asked, and is problematizing this binary that y'all seem stuck in. And I'm so grateful to have been part of that legacy, and to have known people that were older than me that were able to be role models and supports, and say, this is the legacy that you come from. I'm so grateful to have the experience of those folks to help me feel empowered and not feel like I needed to shut up and be shut down. And I certainly got some of that in high school and college, and I'm really grateful that I had mentors who said, you don't have to live that way, and that I was really able to own that and say, this is my experience, you're not taking it away from me, and because of this, I'm not going to let you take the rest of my life either.
Oh, thank you, Becca. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very powerful.
That is very powerful.
Yeah.
Leith, and what are you grateful for?
What am I grateful for? Well, I again might refer back to Leslie Feinberg's book on transgender warriors. In the eye-opening of that I was raised a girl, grew up a woman, and I experienced, I'm not going to say I experienced everything that women experience, because just like every gender, we're all, play a little bit of a different role in that gender, but I definitely experienced I would say the key elements of being a woman, and And then I feel honored that I actually got to transition in a safe way, and I had the support that I needed, and I had the groups to talk to people, and what I wasn't quite prepared for was how to live as a man. I wanted to be a man, but I didn't know that I had to change. And there was this feeling that all of a sudden I had to change and be a man and embrace that male privilege, which I think a lot of people don't understand until you see it
That's the
from a
truth.
different perspective.
Yes.
And so I think what's really interesting is to have lived both sides and have that gift, as Leslie Feinberg has said, that we become more of I think a spiritual person in having that knowledge, and I think I am also very grateful. Recently, I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and I went as stealth, which means that I didn't come out to anybody. But after I got off the trail, I did come out to a few people, and they have been incredibly accepting, and that's been really nice. It's been really nice to know that you can still have something in common with somebody and not be judged for your gender.
Would you mind going a little bit into the stealth, that term?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you explain that for the audience?
Well, I think for me, I did come out in Chicago, and I did transition in Chicago, and I transitioned among a community of queer-friendly people, and so I was out. I was out to everybody. I didn't have to even out myself, really. I didn't have to explain my pronoun. People in that community just said, what's your name and what's your pronoun? And I didn't have to hide who I was. But I felt like when I got onto the Appalachian Trail, I had never, that would be my first experience leaving that community in Chicago. And I felt like for my safety, I guess, I didn't know what that community was going to be like. And the Appalachian Trail is a very, very tight hiking community. And the community itself is very safe. But what it is when you go into a town and somebody in the town might overhear that, you're gay or you're transgendered, that they may, tend to follow you on the trail and harm you. And so I decided to not say anything and to live as what people saw me.
How they perceived you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a safety issue. Yes.
Yeah.
It still is.
Yeah.
In 2015.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Leith.
Yeah.
Sage, could you tell us what you're grateful about this?
Yeah, for sure. I have two things I want to talk about. The first is probably the biggest thing I feel grateful for is I think being trans has gifted me an incredible amount of empathy and compassion for anybody who is experiences prejudice and oppression. I think as a white person, I don't know what it's like to be a person of color. As an able-bodied person, I don't know what it's like to be a person with a disability. But as a trans person, I know what it's like to be treated different. And I know what it's like to be treated different every day. And I know what it's like to have subtle and not so subtle aggression coming at me because I'm different. And I know what it's like to navigate institutions that are discriminatory, and to navigate businesses and churches and things like that, and to be looked at in certain ways. And now that, that's not a fun experience. We all have a fair amount of resilience now because of that, and I'm grateful for the resilience. It has a cost, and it has had a cost on my body and my heart. But I will say, going back to the empathy piece, there's something really helpful right now on the planet in really deeply understanding what it's like to be treated different, because so many cultures and people are being treated very badly right now, and are being, there's just so much discrimination, and I think as a white person, as a person with other types of privilege, it's really important to be able to use my understanding of what it's like to be treated in a crappy way to have both deep empathy for other people who are experiencing that, but also to really explore how to show up to be able to participate in creating a safer world for all of us. And I think being trans it actually makes me really emotional. Like, I feel like it has really, I think it's really been the biggest thing that's like, it deeply brought me to like a deep love of other people, because I've been conditioned just like everybody else. I've been conditioned in a racist society, in a sexist society, in a classist society, I think being trans has just leveled the playing field inside myself, where I have a pretty deep lived understanding now of what it's like, and I'm really dedicated to creating a world where, nobody has to experience that, and so I'm grateful for that. The other thing I want to say that I am very grateful for is that being a part of the trans community is one of the most amazing communities to be a part of. We are wild, we are wonderful. I've met people I would have never met otherwise. Yes. Whether it's the gender spectrum, creativity, diversity, spirituality, social justice, just being out of the box, there's something about that. And because of that, and then the diversity amongst each other, I just feel so grateful for that, that I get to be a part of that.
I want to say that I have to interject on that as well. I have found the trans or gender diverse community to be the most loving and embracing community that I've come up against. We talk a lot about acceptance and inclusivity, and just as an example, people dating with each other and it doesn't always work out. I've never once heard anyone talk badly about the other person. It's simply, it doesn't work out. That's just been my experience. I'm not saying it's always, that we're perfect, but I have found it, and Becca you want to say anything about that, or?
I think humans are humans, and
Sure.
Some of us talk shit.
It's just been my experience.
Yeah.
Over and over again, I've just found folks, maybe it isn't just particular gender diversity, but folks who have been oppressed can almost go one or two ways. They can almost become the oppressor, or they become almost more understanding and empathetic. And it's just been my experience anyways that I found the gender diverse community to be a very understanding community, and I feel very blessed to be a part of it. And I wouldn't have thought so a long time ago, but anyways, I do now. So one of the other questions that I had intended is, because of all this awareness, often I read articles about, how to talk to a trans person. And almost always these articles will say what not to say. And I think that's useful. But I guess I'd like to open up the opportunity, like, what would you like people to ask you? I know one of the questions for me that I really love to be asked is, when did you know about this? And I like those kind of questions, and folks who know that I'm a Christian will ask, how did I reconcile my faith with this, which is quite a lengthy story. And so I would like the audience, someone who's out there who genuinely wants to come at you, say they've never met a gender diverse person, although I think that's getting rarer, but say they haven't, and they're trying to be respectful, but they're curious. And can we provide some guidance to these folks about how we would like to be asked, and maybe some of the questions we would like them to ask us? And so, Becca, if you don't mind, again, let's start with you.
Sure. I really like the idea of just normalizing gender inclusive language, as well as gender inclusive spaces. I think more and more it's important. I love kids, and I'm really concerned that young people grow up in an environment where they're taught and modeled that it's okay for them to express themselves however they feel comfortable doing that. And so I think what that means is that like us grown-er folks, because none of us ever totally grow up,
Right.
I think, right? Like, you know, we have a lot of unpacking to do around how we relate to one another and what we expect of one another. So I love your question about how would I want a person to speak with me, but it's deeper than that. How would I want a person to interact with me? And so for me, what that means is normalizing things like asking pronouns in an introduction.
Sure.
It means normalizing words like y'all or folks instead of hey you guys, right? And it also means normalizing an equity among people around the things that they do. Like I work with a team of people that are predominantly men, and I really like my team, and we have great conversations about what it means like to be a feminist and to be gender inclusive on our off time at work, which is rare and extremely positive and very valuable to me. But I sometimes catch like myself being the person that gets caught up like doing the cleaning after work, right? And so like there are conversations to be had around like what my gender presentation says to you about what I'm able to do or what my skill set is or what the default in this conversation is going to be. Or I sometimes, you know, in conversations that I have with friends and loved ones, I catch myself, you know, accepting a lot of mansplaining. And like I get white guys who like to tell me a lot about how it's, you know, why it's okay for them to interrupt me because it's a cultural understanding that we only speak one person at a time. And I'm over here like, actually, you're interrupting me, and that's hella rude. So how about, you know, we just have a conversation, I think, as a society about how we interact with each other. And that has to do with the way that we greet each other, the way that we greet a room, but also the way that we divide up labor and the way that we especially, I'm thinking more and more about the burden of emotional labor, right? And how folks who are perceived to be female are often tasked with unpacking uncomfortable issues in a room or are tasked with speaking up for themselves as feminists. And I'm curious about how we can encourage all of our younger children to continue to make the progress around those issues of equity, and not just for comfort and for safety. Those are important, those are key things, but just about equity. Like how are we being fair to each other in the way that we assume each other experiences the world?
Thank you, Becca.
Thanks.
Leaf.
Again, I think those are some really great points.
Very, yes.
I think I would add if you had just found out that I was transgendered, and what that means, and I think what that means is just to kind of add on to what you were saying, which is to acknowledge that this person has just shared a very personal story with you, and that you need to come at that, you know, with empathy and acknowledge that you know this means something to that person that they just told you. And so I think a comment such as, wow, that was really brave, or, you know, wow, that sounds like that was pretty hard, or to ask, you know, how are you doing? Or, you know, how do you have friends and family that you know, can, you know, lean on? I think the other thing I wanted to add was, just slipped my mind. I was going to add, shoot.
We'll get back to
You'll
you
have to
then,
get back
Leaf.
to me, yes.
All right, we'll get back to you,
Sorry about
Leaf.
that.
No, don't be sorry. Sage, would you like to go ahead and answer?
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, it's sweet, you know, like with trans stuff, with kids, I really love gender and kids, because kids are just so like he, she, both, you know, in 5 minutes they can call me he, she 5-10 times, and it's like there's just an organic, you know, sort of process with it. And I think because of all the conditioning, adults, it's a lot more awkward I guess, you know, it's not so much what I would like people to say, it's would be more about how I would like people to be. I think it's similar to what you were saying. And I think, you know, a couple of things. One is, of course, kind.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
like with everything. Like if you don't have a fair amount of kindness on board, I'm not particularly interested, right? And then secondly, I would say curiosity, right? Like we need so much curiosity on the planet right now. And it's such a tricky time, right? Economically, politically, because we're very in the us-them paradigm right now. Whether it's trans, cisgendered, whether it's
Race,
Christians
really,
and
yes,
Muslims,
yes.
whether it's whatever, and we need so much more capacity to be able to tolerate the discomfort because we were conditioned to fear certain people and difference.
Yes.
And that is not just a mental fear, that is a physiological fear. When conditioning gets imprinted, we then become, our body tries to protect ourselves from difference. And so we have an apparatus in us that literally says, flee or fight. Something that's different from us, and it's actually it operates quicker than our minds. It is a body experience that's a split second. And so what I'd love is for people to start to develop a capacity to be able to for all of us to develop the capacity to keep tolerating the discomfort of difference, because we all have it. I mean, we all are conditioned with it. We grow up in this bubble that we're trained in it, we're imprinted in a million different ways. And so it's like building a muscle to be able to just breathe through my discomfort of what I believe is right or wrong or uncomfortable. And if somebody's doing that with me, like even if they're having negative thoughts toward me because I'm trans or because I'm whatever, that's a beautiful thing, because I can't expect everybody to, just love me or love everybody. Like it's just not realistic on the planet right now. But I do feel like we can all at least make the commitment to be developing the capacity to tolerate discomfort and uncertainty in myself and in ourselves. So that would be, I would say, the biggest thing that I would really love. And certainly, gender's fun. So I would also invite people to explore their own gender and realize that this isn't just about trans people.
Right.
I mean, I've always believed trans people is about, the transgender movement is actually a collectively liberating movement for everybody.
Yes.
Because part of what it's doing is it's saying, hey, let's open up male and female here, and let's see how much fun we can have.
Sure.
Right? And
Sure.
I think that's so scary to traditional sort of gender roles and sort of that keep a lot of big structures in place. But I think if you can kind of take a couple breaths into that, like there's just a lot of fun to be had.
Yeah. Yes.
And so like staying curious about that, right? Like staying curious about it. Like we need a lot more fun on the planet too.
I really wanted to speak to that. I've been doing this a lot myself, is just, I find myself, if I'm getting uncomfortable, actually describing it in the body, and then just, I'm curious, where's this coming from? And just digging deeper. And then if somebody I come up against, and I just, let's be curious about that, be curious. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being curious, So, and then we got to bring in the cardinal, right? The cardinal rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. I actually think we can expound on that. Treat others the way they want to be treated.
Thank you for saying that.
Okay. Would you like to say something more on that? So,
Well, I just
because we don't all want to be treated the same.
Exactly.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the cardinal rule is stay curious and stay fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so if it's not fun, don't do it, is my philosophy. But that comes with the caveat that I then have to make the decision that sitting in discomfort, growing as a person, and staying curious are fun, even when they don't feel fun.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you.
I did kind of remember what I was going to say, which was along the lines we were just talking about, because I have had a chance to spend quite a lot of time with my sister's children, and my sister is definitely, I would say, on my side.
That's great.
And I think that what is important when you come out to somebody, to have them understand what they're relating to the next person and how they're relating to that. And so if you know, to relate that to in a respectful manner. And so she has explained this to my nieces and who I am. And what you're talking about with the being, you know, accepting, they're great. They live in the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I say one more
Absolutely,
thing? Great.
Sage.
So one more thing about what would be great from people is, I also think it would be anybody who is in some sort of leadership position, or if you're in a employment or volunteer job where you have an influence on other people. I think there's so many things, small and big things you can do. If you're a librarian, you can think about what books are in the library that are talking about trans. If you're, you know, if you're the owner of a coffee shop, you might think about your bathroom, and if you have two different, you know, male and female bathrooms, and how you might sort of think about what are the possibilities if people who are trans need to use the bathrooms, and what's your sort of policy on that. And I think there's just so many ways that you can sort of be in your position of power and think about, hey, is this meeting I'm running asking about pronouns? Is this classroom I'm running, in the history lesson, are we talking about, you know, a nice cross-cultural mix, a nice mix of genders? There's just so many ways that we can really think about, and we can think about, right, that young kid who's 4 years old, who is born a boy, who's trying on his mom's lipstick, right? And how are we creating a safe world for this child? And what are all the different ways that we can create conditions that, if nothing less, are neutral, but ultimately affirming, for like,
Affirming,
yes,
yes.
yes to
Great.
that, and yes to this. And some people would say that that's special treatment, like we have to change things. And I just think, like, it's about, like, love. Like, it's about everybody deserves, like, the deepest affirmation possible. And I just think, why not? What else are we doing? Like, I mean, we're working 60
right.
hours a week.
We're
Like, let's
working,
throw
yeah.
some love in there, you know?
Right.
And what's the worst thing that can happen?
Well, when you say that, I think of is, you know, we've been presented with some new information. We didn't have this information, and now we do. So let's respond in a loving way. And I think of awareness, because I certainly cannot be aware of every individual issue, deaf issues, trans issues, race issues, but we can always be kind. We can always come at it from a loving intent. And that, I think, would keep us safe, you know, if we come at it from that angle. And so if there's, you know, other issues that I'm not aware of and they get brought to my attention, then, like you said, let's fix it. Why not change it?
Yeah.
Look at it differently, explore it.
Right, and how can I be an ally?
How can I be
to
an
the,
ally?
To the population
Yeah.
of people that isn't feeling safe,
Exactly.
or is getting treated unfairly.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
this
I was
this
gonna
is.
say, and creating a new history for the next generation.
Let's rewrite the history.
Well,
Let's rewrite it. Yeah.
so that when they read that, as we, you know, read Leslie Feinberg's research, these children are reading this and going, wow, it's actually okay to be who I am.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you.
Well, the last question that I had is, and you all have kind of answered it anyways, but it's a two-part question, I guess, and that is, if there was something that I didn't ask that you wanted to speak about, I would like you to take the time to do so. And if you can't think of anything, then a question I think is great is how would you like to leave the world a better place? And so we'll kick off with Leith.
Uh-oh. Well, we used up one of my answers, which was being an identical twin sister. I mean, having an identical twin sister. I think some other stories I have to share, again, are living in what it is a male world. I see that the men I work with don't see that privilege that they have, and I and then it's really interesting working with women who assume that I am a man in their presence. And so I was part of this running club, and I am a slow jogger, so I'm jogging with the women, some of the women in the back of the pack, and they are having a wonderful conversation about clothing and underclothing and bouncing around, and and one of them turns back to me and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're talking about, things that you don't want to hear." And I really was in a position where I just wanted that freedom. I mean, this is just one example of wanting that freedom to say, I do know what you're talking about, and I really empathize with this conversation. And it's similar to the twin thing, which is, it's just, why can't this just be a normal, conversation where it's already out on the table that the gender words just swing back and forth. So, so if I were just to say to you, well, actually, that's my identical twin, then we would just kind of move on. You're like, oh, okay, so I know that. Or I would be like, yeah, I understand the whole, bra situation very well indeed, and then be included in that conversation. So that's, I guess, what I have to add on that.
Thank you so much, Leith. Sage.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I would add is just that I think being trans can be really complicated. And I think it can be, at times, really scary. And I think it can be overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be necessarily, but, and so I just want to say to anybody out there that's trans or exploring it and that's having a hard time, that you're not alone, and that there's been a lot of people that have come before you that, have been brave and that no doubt struggling and grappling internally with something so deep and precious to you is so worth it. And that you have this whole community that's cheering you on, whether you've ever met them or not. And I want to say too, the people that are non-trans that might be struggling, with life. I mean, it's a tricky time to be alive. There's a lot going on.
There sure is.
And I think that we all deserve so much more often than we have. And so it is our birthright to be loved and to love. And so I just really, my hope is that people keep trying to reach through their fear so that we can actually reconnect with each other on the planet and actually start to really get some of what we really need with each other. So, and I just want to and just remind all of us that how resilient we are, and how much strength it often takes to be here and show up each day.
Fear is a tough one. It makes you, react and not make a thoughtful decision. Becca, we still have time for you, so yes,
Sure.
Absolutely, make time.
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks for y'all for being here. It's been really cool to hear what you all have to say. Something that I think often about, I'm a mental health worker, and so, and I see friends of mine struggling, especially to pay for their healthcare costs, and so, and I don't have the answer to how we talk about gender dysmorphia. I think that is a question it's not up to me to answer at all, but I think it's one we have to ask. And so I think there are two issues there. First of all, I really believe that healthcare is a human right and that we should all have access to affordable healthcare, whether it's because someone needs surgery or hormones, or because they need their teeth pulled or they need cancer treatment. Whatever it is, I think we should have access to those things, and we don't right now, and that's a justice issue. But I also think the way that we are talking about gender as a problem of the mind is a justice issue. And I see in the work that I do, sometimes mental health workers minimize the pronouns that folks feel that they are entitled to use, because maybe the amount of money that they have doesn't allow them to purchase new gender markers, or doesn't allow, they don't feel that they present the way that they ought to if they were a trans person, and they don't look trans enough, so they're not going to treat them that way. And I think that, that's problematic to wellness and recovery. And I think as a community, we just have a lot of questions to ask ourselves and a lot of accountability to hold each other to. I think the thing I'd like to drive home to folks, if nothing else, is to respect how people identify and to be willing to learn something new. That's been a journey for me. I'm certainly not perfect. I don't think any of us are. But to stay curious and to stay humble and to try to respect the journey that other people are on, because you never know. You don't know, a smile or a grimace can make the difference between somebody's day. It can make the difference between how somebody's feeling that week or that month, or whether they make the decision to transition or to tell you something personal the next time they talk to you, if at all. So I'm really glad to have been here with all of you. Thanks so much for having us, Matthew.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming on. I think it takes a tremendous act of courage to do this. And I certainly have learned a lot tonight. And those of you watching this program, I hope that you did as well, and that you kept an open mind and an open heart. And thank you so much for being with us.